Okay, today we are going to talk about the diuretics. So, what are diuretics? Diuretics are the drugs or agents which increase the volume of urine. That means these drugs increase the production of urine. Now, let's come to the classification. We can classify the drugs, that means the diuretics, according to various criteria. Suppose according to their potency or efficacy, according to their site of action, according to their mechanism of action, etc. Now, according to potency or efficacy, okay. So, suppose this is your nephron. Let me draw a nephron. Okay. All right. So this is your nephron. So this is the proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle. This is the ascending limb of loop of Henle. This is the distal convoluted tubule, the collecting ducts. Right? So potency or efficacy. Now, in the proximal convoluted tubule, you know that around 60 to 65% reabsorption, fluid reabsorption occurs here, and in this part, the loop of Henle part, there is about 20 to 25% of reabsorption. Here around 10% reabsorption, and here is only in the collecting duct only 2 to 3% reabsorption. So loop diuretics, which actually work on this area in the loop of Henle. So the loop diuretics have an efficacy of 20 to 25%. So 20 to 25% reabsorption. For that reason, they are called high efficacy. And thiazide diuretics work in this part, the distal convoluted tubule. So they have moderate efficacy, and potassium sparing drugs, they have low efficacy, because in the collecting ducts and collecting tubules only 2 to 3% water reabsorption occurs. For that reason, this is called low efficacy. Now, according to site of action, in the proximal convoluted tubule, carbonic anhydrase inhibitors and osmotic diuretics, these drugs act on the loops, furosemide, distal convoluted tubule, thiazides, and collecting duct and collecting tubules. We have drugs like spironolactone, amiloride, etc. Then come to mechanism of action. According to mechanism of action, blocking the sodium potassium 2 chloride co-transport mechanism. By this mechanism acts the loop diuretics like furosemide. By blocking the sodium chloride co-transport mechanism act the drugs thiazide diuretics. Blocking the aldosterone receptor, there acts spironolactone. By blocking sodium channel, there acts amiloride. Blocking the carbonic anhydrase, there is acetazolamide. And by osmosis, there is a drug that is called osmotic diuretic like mannitol. Now let's come to the loop diuretics. How do they act? Their mechanism of action. Number one, they inhibit the sodium potassium 2 chloride co-transport mechanism on the thick ascending limb of loop of Henle, thereby causing huge diuresis, natriuresis, and kaliuresis. Okay, so they cause excretion of water, diuresis, sodium, natriuresis, potassium, kaliuresis. and they also cause renal vasodilation and increase renal blood flow, probably by increasing prostaglandin synthesis. And it's a weak carbonic anhydrase inhibitor secreted from proximal convoluted tubule. That secreted from the proximal convoluted tubule may interfere with free water clearance. Okay. Now, one important question here, that these drugs are called high ceiling diuretics. Why loop diuretics are called high ceiling diuretics? Because they have the maximum efficacy, can be used in renal insufficiency where the GFR is less than 10 ml per minute. Still, in this condition, these drugs can act, and increase in dose causes increase in effect. You will increase the dose of furosemide, there will be increase the effect of its diuretic effect. Okay, so increase more dose, get more diuretic effect. Increase more dose, get more diuretic effect. So this is called high ceiling diuretic. Let's see the pharmacokinetics. These drugs are orally absorbed, short duration of action, half-life is about 1.5 hours, and duration of action 4 to 6 hours. Extensively plasma protein bound and metabolized by liver and excreted through the kidneys. Come to the indications of these drugs. Number 1, acute pulmonary edema and acute left ventricular failure. Okay, so in case of acute pulmonary edema and acute left ventricular failure, there is fluid overload. So if you give these diuretics, they will reduce the blood volume, water and electrolytes like sodium and potassium will be lost. So you can use these drugs here. You can see that diuresis leads to reduced plasma volume and relieves pulmonary edema, and also they have direct vasodilator effect, which can cause increased blood in veins, so reduce left ventricular filling pressure and relieve pulmonary edema. That means if they dilate the veins, so there will be more blood in the veins, more pooling of the blood will be there. Okay, so if you constrict the veins, the pressure will be more, and that will go to the heart, and that will increase the end-diastolic volume. But if these veins are dilated, blood will be more in the veins, that will go less in the heart, and there will be less end-diastolic volume, so thereby they relieve pulmonary edema. You can use these drugs in case of hepatic or renal edema, like you can use these drugs in liver cirrhosis. Okay, there is edema in liver cirrhosis, there is edema in nephrotic syndrome, so you can use these drugs in hepatic or renal edema. And in case of forced diuresis along with intravenous fluid, you can use these drugs in barbiturate or salicylate poisoning, anion overdose like fluoride, iodide, etc. So one of my students once asked me that if the diuretics could be used in poisoning cases. Here is your answer. That means the diuretics can be used in these cases: barbiturate, salicylate poisoning, like, and then anion overdose like fluoride, iodide, etc. And you can use these drugs in case of acute hypercalcemia and hyperkalemia. Okay, so as we have mentioned that these drugs causes loss of electrolytes. Okay, so they cause loss of sodium in the urine, loss of potassium in the urine, loss of calcium in the urine, loss of magnesium in the urine. So they cause loss of so many electrolytes. So if there is increased potassium, that means there is hyperkalemia, or increased calcium levels in the blood like hypercalcemia, then you can use these drugs. Okay, in acute hypercalcemia and hyperkalemia. Okay, sodium, chloride and water should be maintained, but in those cases you have to look at the sodium, chloride and water levels as well. So you have to maybe you have to give intravenous fluids. Okay, now adverse effects of the loop diuretics. Number 1, ototoxicity. So auto means ER, so hearing problems will be there. This is not auto, that means automatic. No, this is not. This is ototoxicity, toxicity in the ear. So what happens? sodium, potassium and 2-chloride is inhibited in the hair cells inside the ear. So deafness is more prominent than vestibular disturbances. Okay, in the eighth cranial nerve, you know, there are two parts. One is the vestibular part, another is the cochlear part. So the cochlear part is more damaged, so deafness is more prominent than the vestibular disturbances, and ethacranic acid is most ototoxic. So ethacranic acid is lobe diuretic. You can say furosemide, torsemide, okay, ethacranic acid, but ethacranic acid is the most ototoxic. They can cause hyperuricemia. Hyperuricemia, why hyperuricemia? Because they compete with uric acid to be secreted from the proximal convoluted tubule, and they can aggravate gouty attacks. So how the hyperuricemia is caused? Suppose this is your blood vessel, renal blood vessel, maybe this is the peritubular capillary. Okay, so what happens, and this is your epithelial cell, proximal convoluted tubule, the epithelial cell, and here is your lumen, right? This is the lumen, tubular lumen. So here is your urine, and here is your blood, here is your blood, here is your urine, and this is the proximal convoluted tubule epithelial cell. So what happens, uric acid must be excreted. So uric acid through an anion transporter in the epithelial cell, it comes to the epithelial cell, and through another anion transporter it comes to the tubular lumen, and through the tubular lumen in the urine it gets excreted. So what happens here, that furosemide or maybe loop diuretics, you can say the loop diuretics or furosemide, that also uses this transporter. So furosemide is also secreted. So, you know, this is secreted into the epithelial cell like this, through this channel, through this transporter. So this competes with uric acid. So uric acid cannot bind with this transporter and cannot be transported here and cannot be transported here and cannot be excreted. So what happens, that furosemide it gets transported here in the epithelial cell, and from that in the tubular lumen, but uric acid cannot get transported in the epithelial cell. So uric acid level in the blood increases. So uric acid level in the blood increases, and that leads to hyperuricemia, and hyperuricemia leads to uric acid gets deposited in the joints, mainly in the joints of grade 2, and that leads to gout, or that leads to aggravation of the gouty conditions. There is severe pain in the toes, right? So this is the mechanism. Then that can lead to acute hypovolemia, and that may lead to shock, arrhythmias, etc. because this is excreting a lot of water and salt, right? So there is huge loss of volume, so that can lead to acute hypovolemia, and hypokalemia and metabolic alkalosis, that can lead to hypokalemia and metabolic alkalosis. Okay. And then hypomagnesemia. Of course, in case of prolonged use, magnesium will also be lost, and that can lead to hypomagnesemia. So you can say that hypocalcemia usually do not occur with furosemide because calcium is reabsorbed from the distal convoluted tubule. Okay, so hypocalcemia is less prominent with furosemide because that will inhibit the reabsorption of this drug, this calcium, in the loops, but that will be reabsorbed again in the distal tubules. So hypocalcemia usually do not occur. And NSAIDs, they inhibit renal prostaglandin synthesis and thereby hamper the furosemide action. Okay, so as we have seen that furosemide acts by renal prostaglandin, that can cause renal vasodilation by this agent. So if you use simultaneously NSAIDs, the NSAIDs will inhibit the renal prostaglandin synthesis, and thereby that will disturb the furosemide function. Now let's come to thiazides. Thiazides are very very important drugs in relation to the antihypertensive group of drugs. Okay, so thiazide drugs are of two types. What are the types of thiazides? Thiazide diuretics are of two types. One is thiazides and another is thiazide like diuretics or thiazide related agents. Okay, so thiazides like chlorothiazide, hydrochlorothiazide, these are thiazides, and thiazide like agents or thiazide related agents like chlorthalidone, clopamide, indapamide, these are the thiazide related drugs. So thiazide related drugs have a special character, that is they contain sulfur components. Okay, so the patients who have sulfur allergy, okay, we cannot give these drugs to those patients who have sulfur allergy. Now let's look at the mechanism of action of the thiazide diuretics. Okay, so this is your tubular lumen. Okay, so this is your tubular lumen and this is your epithelial cell. This is the epithelial cell, renal tubular epithelial cell, and here is a special transporter which is sodium chloride co-transporter, and sodium chloride through sodium and chloride co-transporter, sodium and chloride are transported. That means sodium and chloride have to be reabsorbed from this area, from this lumen, okay, through the distal this is the distal convoluted tubule, and through this epithelial cell into the bloodstream ultimately. Okay, so this is your transporter, sodium and chloride transports into the epithelial cell, and then from here sodium will ultimately reabsorbed into the bloodstream. Okay, now what happens? Sodium coming into the epithelial cell, then it will be reabsorbed via this pump. This is sodium potassium ATPase. Here is a transporter named sodium potassium ATPase, and this transporter removes 3 sodium from the epithelial cell and brings 2 potassium into the cell. Okay, so thereby sodium is reabsorbed and chloride will be reabsorbed through its transporter here. Okay, that is not our main concern. Our main concern is sodium. Now what happens after getting reabsorbed into the bloodstream? Sodium will come back in exchange of calcium. Okay, so there will be calcium, so calcium will go out and sodium will come in. This is the normal physiology. Now what happens if you give thiazide diuretics? So thiazide diuretics will block this transporter. If this will block this transporter, so sodium cannot be reabsorbed, sodium cannot go to this space, so sodium will be excreted, this will be excreted, right? So that this is the diuretic mechanism. So sodium will be excreted, and what follows sodium? Water follows sodium. So along with sodium, water will be excreted, so there will be diuresis. And what happens here, that now you are giving sodium chloride co-transport blocker. So here is less sodium, here is less sodium, and calcium. What happens to calcium now? Now here is less sodium and here is more sodium. Okay, so more sodium will come here and more calcium will be reabsorbed here in the bloodstream. Okay. So calcium is reabsorbed more from this area. Okay, calcium is reabsorbed more from this area. Here is more calcium. Here is more calcium. So more calcium will be reabsorbed, and here is less sodium, so more sodium will come here, right? So the ultimate result will be hypercalcemia. Okay, the ultimate result will be hypercalcemia. Now antihypertensive mechanism, of course, thiazide diuretics increase the loss of sodium and water, that will decrease the plasma volume, that will decrease the venous return, ultimately that will decrease the end-diastolic volume and decreased cardiac output, decreased blood pressure, and there is direct vasodilation. There will be direct vasodilation through this, but this mechanism is not fully understood. How the thiazide diuretics cause direct vasodilation, this mechanism is still not fully understood. Okay, but they cause this thing, and thereby they decrease total peripheral resistance, and thereby they decrease blood pressure. Now come to the pharmacokinetics. The thiazide diuretics are effective orally. They have prolonged half-life, and most thiazides take 1 to 3 weeks to produce a stable reduction in blood pressure. Now come to the metabolic effects of the thiazide diuretics. Number 1, they cause hypokalemia and metabolic alkalosis. So how they cause hypokalemia and metabolic alkalosis? You know that from the distal convoluted tubule, sodium reabsorption is prevented, and more sodium is coming into the collecting duct lumen. Okay, so in the collecting duct lumen, more sodium is coming. Now what happens that from the collecting duct lumen, some of the sodium gets reabsorbed, okay, in the blood vessels. So in the collecting duct lumen, some of the sodium gets reabsorbed. So here, as the sodium is positively charged, so positively charged ions leave the lumen, so the lumen is now negatively charged. It has more negative charges. To compensate that, more potassium, which is positively charged, and more proton, which is positively charged, come into the lumen. Okay, so they come into the lumen and get excreted. So if more potassium is excreted, there is production of hypokalemia, and if more protons are excreted, that leads to metabolic alkalosis, right? Then hyponatremia, hypomagnesemia, hypercalcemia. Why hypercalcemia occurs, we have already discussed. And then there is hyperuricemia. Of course, you know that thiazide diuretics are also secreted in the proximal convoluted tubules, and they use this organic anion transporter. So the thiazide diuretics, they inhibit these organic anion transporters, so the uric acid cannot get transported into the proximal convoluted tubule cells, and thereby they cannot be transported into the lumen to get excreted. So the uric acid level will increase, and there will be hyperuricemia. And if you use these drugs for a prolonged period of time, then that can lead to gout, right? Now they can lead to hyperglycemia. This thiazide diuretics can lead to hyperglycemia. Why hyperglycemia occurs? Due to hypokalemia. That leads to hypokalemia, and this hypokalemia leads to decreased insulin release, or they inhibit the insulin release. Now the mechanism is that this is the pancreatic beta cell. This is the pancreatic beta cell, and in the pancreatic beta cell there are some ATP sensitive potassium channels. Okay, so if there is hyperglycemia, now first I am talking about the normal physiology. If there is hyperglycemia, what happens? Some glucose comes into this cell, and the glucose and the cell converts this glucose into ATP, and ATP blocks this channel. This ATP sensitive potassium channel is blocked. So what happens? Potassium cannot go out from the cell, and potassium will be increased within the cell. So this increased potassium will trigger entry of calcium, and this calcium will stimulate the insulin store to release insulin into the blood vessel. So more insulin will be released, and this insulin will then decrease the blood glucose level. Okay, this is the normal physiology. Now what happens if there is hypokalemia? If there is hypokalemia, here there is not enough potassium to trigger this channel, this calcium channel. So if this calcium channel is not stimulated, this insulin will not come out. So there will be inhibition of insulin release. And thiazide diuretics also lead to hyperlipidemia. Now let's come to the indications of thiazide diuretics. Number 1, mild to moderate hypertension. This is the drug of choice for initial therapy. Heart failure, furosemide is the drug of choice in case of heart failure, but thiazides can be added. Mild to moderate edema. Then hypercalciuria. If there is hypercalciuria, that can lead to stone formation, like oxalate stone formation in the urinary tract. So you can use these drugs in hypercalciuria so that you can reabsorb the calcium and decrease the hypercalciuria. And you can use this drug in nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. Okay, and in case of osteopenia, there is there is increased loss of calcium in the urine. Okay, so in case of osteopenia, you can use thiazide diuretics so that less calcium will be excreted and more calcium will be reabsorbed. Then come to the adverse effects like hypokalemia, hyponatremia, volume depletion, gout due to hyperuricemia, there is formation of gout. Then hypercalcemia. This hypercalcemia increases calcium reabsorption from the distal convoluted tubule. We have talked about this. Hyperglycemia and acute interstitial nephritis with thiazide-like diuretics having allergy to sulfur agents. So the thiazide-like diuretics, they contain the sulfur agents, and the patients who are allergic to sulfur agents, in these patients these drugs may cause acute interstitial nephritis. Now an interesting thing is use of thiazides in nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. Now what happens in nephrogenic diabetes insipidus is that, suppose this is your nephron. Okay, now this is your distal convoluted tubule, and this is your collecting duct. Okay, so in nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, the production of antidiuretic hormone is normal, but the antidiuretic hormone cannot act in this part. They actually act on the collecting ducts. Okay, so the collecting ducts are actually resistant to antidiuretic hormones, so they cannot act on the collecting duct and they cannot prevent the diuresis. So there is loss of huge amount of water in the urine. So use of thiazide diuretics may seem counterproductive, right? because there is already huge amount of water loss in the urine. On top of that, you are giving thiazide diuretics so that it increases the amount of urine production. So that may seem counterproductive, but no, there is a role of thiazide diuretics. Why thiazide diuretics are important here? When you are giving thiazide diuretics, okay, that means that is decreasing the blood volume because it causes increased loss of water, so there is decreased blood volume. So decreased blood volume means decreased GFR. Here the GFR will be decreased glomerular filtration rate. So what happens in the proximal convoluted tubule, most of the water reabsorption occurs, right? So in the proximal convoluted tubule now gets more time to reabsorb water. So more reabsorption of water occurs in the proximal convoluted tubule, and so less amount of water reaches here and here. For that reason, thiazide diuretics is beneficial in these patients. Now come to the advantages of thiazides as antihypertensive drugs. Once daily dosing is more convenient, no fluid retention, no tolerance, less postural hypotension, CNS adverse effects are rare and low cost. Some of the disadvantages of furosemide: more chance of hypovolemia and electrolyte imbalance. Reduction in blood pressure is not maintained round the clock. So these are the disadvantages of furosemide as antihypertensive drugs. So furosemide is not actually used as antihypertensive drug. Now indapamide, this is a thiazide-like diuretic. It has less diuretic but more antihypertensive action. Can be used solely as an antihypertensive agent and causes less hypokalemia. This is one of its advantages. Now drug interactions of loops and thiazide diuretics. So number one, hypokalemia, okay, mediated digitalis toxicity. When we will talk about digitalis, then we will talk this thing in detail, and then why hypokalemia causes digitalis toxicity. Now furosemide, more autotoxicity along with other autotoxic drugs such as aminoglycosides, which are a group of antibiotics, right? Then NSAIDs like indomethacin decrease their efficacy by inhibiting prostaglandin synthesis, and probenecid is a drug competes with them for secretion, so decreases each other's efficacy. Okay, probenecid is a drug. This is a uricosuric drug. So probenecid competes with them for secretion, so decreases each other's efficacy. Now let's come to the potassium sparing agents. These are some steroid compounds and chemically related to aldosterone. Their mechanism of action: it is an aldosterone receptor antagonist. So aldosterone enters the cells of collecting tubule and collecting duct, bind with receptor complex, enter the nucleus. Okay, so ultimately what happens, they increase the reabsorption of sodium and increases secretion of potassium into the lumen. So what spironolactone does? Spironolactone binds with aldosterone receptors, inhibits the action of aldosterone. There is increased loss of sodium, but there is retention of potassium, and there is diuresis. Okay, so they block the action of aldosterone, and aldosterone tends to reabsorb sodium and excrete potassium. So if you block aldosterone, there will be more loss of sodium and more retention of potassium, so that will lead to hyponatremia but hyperkalemia. Let's look at the pharmacokinetics. They are orally available, metabolized by the liver, has active metabolite that is called canrenon. Half-life is short, about 1 to 2 hours. Let's look at the indications. Along with furosemide or thiazides to overcome hypokalemia, as these drugs, furosemides and thiazides, they cause hypokalemia. So if you give a potassium sparing drug like spironolactone, then that will neutralize each other's action. That means hyperkalemia and hypokalemia will be neutralized. by one another. Then ascites due to liver cirrhosis. In case of liver cirrhosis, there is ascites. You can use these drugs. So spironolactone along with furosemide. Why? Because in case of liver cirrhosis, there is due to hyperaldosteronism, thiazides or furosemides cannot work, right? So spironolactone breaks this refractoriness. In hypertension, this can be used along with thiazides. In congestive heart failure, it can be used along with other drugs, and this reduces disease progression and also prevents hypokalemia. Let's look at some interactions. So spironolactone plus ACE inhibitors, as we have talked about this earlier, that can lead to dangerous hyperkalemia, and spironolactone and digoxin, that can lead to increased plasma concentration of digoxin, and that can eventually lead to digoxin toxicity. Now let's come to the adverse effects of these drugs. Hyperkalemia, GI disturbance, that can lead to gynecomastia, decreased libido, erectile dysfunction, breast tenderness, menstrual abnormalities in female, and aggravation of peptic ulcer disease. Eplerenone is another drug, another potassium sparing drug. So it has some advantages like more specific aldosterone antagonist, less action on other steroid receptors, less hormonal disturbances. As we have seen that potassium sparing drug like spironolactone, that has more hormonal disturbance, but this drug has less hormonal disturbance and better tolerability profile. This can be used in moderate to severe congestive cardiac failure, post-infarction, left ventricular dysfunction, hypertension, etc. And the adverse effects like GI distress and hyperkalemia. Sodium channel blockers like so you can use these drugs as well, but these drugs are not very important for your exams. There is carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. Mainly act on the proximal convoluted tubule. The mechanism of action is proton is secreted in exchange with sodium in the proximal convoluted tubule. Okay, so proton combines with bicarbonate to make carbonic acid. This carbonic acid then spontaneously dissociates to form water and carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide then diffuses back to cell and water gets excreted. Now carbonic anhydrase inhibitors in the cell does not allow the formation of bicarbonate from carbonic acid from carbon dioxide and water, so they cannot make carbonic acid and dissociate to form proton and bicarb. Therefore no exchange of proton with sodium, and there is excretion of sodium and bicarb. But this is a very less efficacious drug. Only 5% natriuresis occurs because sodium is reabsorbed in the thick ascending limb of lobe of Henle, and carbonic anhydrase is present in some other tissues like GIT mucosa, ciliary muscle of eye, etc. Now let's come to the osmotic diuretics like acetazolamide. Sorry, this is not this is a carbonic anhydrase inhibitor. So indications are glaucoma along with other intraocular pressure reducing agents. It hampers the formation of bicarb. Okay, so this is a carbonic anhydrase inhibitor to alkalinize the urine in acidic drug poisoning or in UTI, and in case of epilepsy in absence seizure where the primary drugs have failed. Okay, so in glaucoma we have talked about this in anti-glaucoma drugs, how acetazolamide can be beneficial in those things, and this can also be used to alkalinize the urine in acidic drug poisoning and in case of epilepsy. What are their adverse effects? Like hypokalemia, excretion of potassium, metabolic acidosis due to excretion of bicarb, excretion of bicarb that can lead to metabolic acidosis. Fatigue, dizziness and cramps can occur. What are the contraindications? One is liver disease. There is chance of developing hepatic coma because of ammonia excretion will be hampered. Ammonia excretion will be disturbed for that reason. Now come to the osmotic diuretics like mannitol. Pharmacologically, this substance is inert not reabsorbed, not metabolized, cannot be given orally, given intravenously. Now mechanism of action: osmotically retains water inside the lumen, causing diuresis, and increases the ACF volume, increases GFR and decreases renin release. What are their indications? To reduce intracranial pressure in stroke, head injury, etc. To reduce intraocular pressure in acute congestive glaucoma. To maintain the GFR in impending renal failure, as in shock. Okay, and their contraindications: acute left ventricular failure and pulmonary edema, and then acute tubular necrosis, anuria, congestive heart failure, cerebral hemorrhage, etc. and their adverse effects like nausea and vomiting, etc. Now I want to mention one thing about the antihypertensive drugs, that in case of young patients, we choose drugs like ACE inhibitors or ARBs. Okay, and in case of older patients, we choose drugs like calcium channel blockers. So why is that? Because in case of older patient, the renin angiotensin aldosterone axis is less active. Their angiotensin 2 level is less in case of older patients. So if you give ACE inhibitors and or ARBs, these drugs will be less effective in older patients. So in case of younger patients, the angiotensin level is higher. For that reason, you give ACE inhibitors or ARBs in the younger patient. Okay, and in case of African Americans, or you can say the black Americans, if they are young, still you can you will not use ACE inhibitors or ARBs. Why? Because these people also do not have very high levels of angiotensin. For that reason, in those patients you will use calcium channel blockers. Okay. So hope you understand. If you have any question, you can ask the questions in the comment section.